So, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to the Aleksanteri Institute Visiting Fellows Research Seminar. My name is Margarita Zavatskaya, and I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Mikhail Turchenko, who will be talking about his new project, Bringing the Voters Together, Coordinated Anti-Regime Voting in Russia. So I think this is a highly topical question given the circumstances. And before I will give the floor to Mikhail, let me just say a few words about Mikhail's biography and what he's been up to. Our speaker today is a visiting Aleksanteri Institute fellow. We're very happy to have him for August and September for the few months. And before that, Mikhail has been teaching back in St. Petersburg at the European University Institute, the Department of Political Science. Actually, he was one of the best teachers, as far as I know, according to the students' feedback. So, and before that, he did his PhD project at the High School of Economics. Mikhail, together with Grigory Golosov, are one of the leading scholars when it comes to the studying of the smart vote strategy. So I think they are the most often quoted, cited authors when it comes to the coordination of voters, when it comes to democratic contexts. And I'm very happy that Mikhail will share his insights into this topic for a broader audience and for all those who are interested in Russian politics, especially given the dramatic circumstances we are living through at the moment. So please, Mikhail, the floor is yours.
Margarita, thank you very much for introduction. In today's presentation, I'm going to tell about my recent project, which is devoted to the most recent and at the same time the most ambitious opposition project in Russia, the smart voting. My today's presentation will be organized as follows. First of all, I start by introducing the audience with what smart vote is, the short overview of the smart voting company. Then I move to the theoretical framework of my research. And after that, I will discuss the main results I got while studying the smart vote company. And the main findings I will summarize in the end, in the conclusion of my speech. A little bit more about the context. The smart vote campaign was invented and advocated by a leading Russian opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, who is in prison right now, unfortunately. Navalny announced the smart vote campaign in November 2018. So the main idea behind this campaign was to facilitate the coordination of opposition-minded voters on the non-party-based level. So this campaign was invented by Navalny because of the very simple fact about the Russian politics. In Russian politics, any coordination at the party level is just impossible. This coordination is impossible because of the fact that all Russian so-called opposition parties either directly controlled by the Kremlin, for instance, LDPR or Just Russia, or dependent on the Kremlin, for instance, Yabloko or Communist Party of the Russian Federation. So in those circumstances, any coalition attempts at the party level, just impossible. At the same time, opposition has to find any solutions in order to somehow to challenge the status quo. So the smart vote campaign, which was proposed by Alexei Navalny, is one of the solutions. So let me shortly explain how the smart vote campaign operated. This campaign was invented for those elections which are held either on single-member plurality districts or multi-member plurality districts. Here you may see the example of voter distribution in given a single-member electoral district. So a couple of words about those complicated words: the single-member district and plurality rule. In single-member electoral districts on plurality rules, in order to candidate got a victory, this candidate has to got just more votes than any other of contenders. just more number of votes. For instance, in this particular example, the candidate which was backed by the United Russia Party, you may see it's blue column, win the race because he or she is just the first. By the way, it's not a hypothetical example; it's a real example of the votes distribution. I got this example from the legislative elections which were held in Republic of Karelia, and this particular district was located in the center of Petrozavodsk. It's electoral district number 6. So you may see that in this particular example, United Russia candidate won. But if we will imagine that all opposition voters would unite across just one candidate, we will see this hypothetical example. As you may clearly see, when all opposition voters will unite across just one candidate, this candidate will easily beat the United Russia one. Yeah, but it's extreme case. We cannot imagine this extreme case in reality, but we can expect in reality, for instance, this case when some opposition voters will switch from the opposition candidates, which have just very moderate chances of win the race, towards the second place candidate. Yeah, as you may see here. In this particular example, you may see that the second candidate, which lured a lot of votes from the other opposition candidates, will win the race and beat the United Russia candidate. So this is exactly the idea behind the smart vote campaign. So the main idea was to give the opposition-minded voters tool to unite across the most powerful candidate in a given electoral districts in order to facilitate the election, in order to facilitate the victory of this particular candidate. So here you may see the main screen from the smart vote page. By the way, the smart vote page is blocked in Russia. Smart vote, to be honest, is pretty close to the such tools as voters' advice applications, which are pretty common in European and in European context and in context in Western democracies. So voter advice applications are tools which are designed in order to provide voters with some advices in the course of a given election. Those tools match voters' preferences with political platforms of political parties in order to create the best match. For instance, you may see the example of voting advice applications for European election. But at the same time, there are a lot of examples from voting advice applications created for national elections. For instance, it's voting advice applications specifically created for Finnish elections. Yeah, you may see it. Smart vote has some similarities with voting advice applications in terms of the smart vote also advise opposition voters or any voters with some advices of whom to vote. But at the same time, the key difference between the smart vote campaign and voting advice applications applied in Western elections is that because Western elections are held based on democratic rules, and there are a lot of parties, there are a lot of candidates with particular political platforms and the like. Those tools are very useful in order to they will help voters to match their preferences with the political platforms of political parties. But in Russian case, all parties which exist does not represent any political ideology, because there is no any contestation of political ideology in a Russian context. So the main idea behind the smart vote is just to provide voter with an advice of the much more popular candidate in a given electoral district. So in order to provide voters with such information, the Navalny team has created some online tools. You may see on the screen just two examples of such tools. For instance, Telegram bot, it's left part of the screen, and right part of the screen, application for Android smartphones or application for iOS smartphones. And the third tool was the official website of the smart vote campaign. In order to get a recommendation, a voter just had to provide either a Telegram bot or an online application or a website with just his or her address without any other personal information, just address. For instance, as in this example, Ulyanovsk City, Borodina Street 1. That's it. That's enough. And after providing those applications with this information, you will get an advice to whom you should vote. For instance, in this particular example, you should vote for Alexei Strelnikov Alexei on the gubernatorial elections, and for for Strelnikov Alexei for city council elections in Ulyanovsk city. Yeah, for instance. It was an example of how smart vote is working. Now I would like to shortly outline the theoretical framework behind my research. So in the scientific literature, there are some strands of the literature which is devoted to the opposition politics and the attempts of opposition to coalesce in order to challenge the status quo. For instance, you may see the literature on pre-electoral opposition coalition in autocracies. It's quite a big literature. Also, we may find literature on conditions calling anti-incumbent coalitions into existence. And also, there is emerging literature about factors that make anti-incumbent coalitions to be dangerous for an authoritarian incumbent. Those three strands of the literature are pretty developed. But at the same time, in the recent literature, scholars raise another question. For instance, what dynamics between the coalition of opposition parties and their support base, or what can explain the electoral behavior and electoral attitudes in non-democracies? So my research somehow related to those strands of the literature, but it goes further because it asks the following question. May citizens in electoral authoritarian regimes credibly oppose undemocratic status quo by means of regular electoral procedures in the absence of any coalition building at the opposition party side? Because if you look at the authoritarian politics across the world, we will see that it's quite a very, very rare situation when there is no any coalition at the political party level, but at the same time there is a political force which can impose this coalition politics at the level of just voters. So there is no, to be honest, there are no examples of such an example. There are no examples of such countries except Russia. Well, let me move now to the empirical results I got. So as I have already noticed, my main question was to numerically assess the impact of the smart voting on the Russian elections. I tried to answer this question by looking at the local elections which were held in the St. Petersburg in September 2019. So in September 2019, St. Petersburg. So just a couple of words about the St. Petersburg and what local elections can be held in the city. So St. Petersburg is a Russian region, and it is divided into 111 so-called intercity territories. Each intercity territory is kind of local municipality. So it's kind of a very, very small settlement within just a very, very big city, St. Petersburg. So in 2019, there were a lot of electoral campaigns across those intercity territories. And on this slide, you may see the distribution of smart vote advisors across all political parties which took part which participated in those local elections in St. Petersburg. As you may see, much more candidates were supported by the smart vote campaign across independents, across Yabloko candidates, and across Just Russia candidates. So just some snapshot. How may we assess the impact of the smart voting? So first of all, we may look at the mean electoral results of those candidates which were supported by the smart vote. It's orange columns. And those candidates which were not supported by the smart vote, it's gray columns. As you may see from the slide, smart votes, those candidates which were supported by the smart vote, were much more successful in terms of votes they got. But there is a big problem with this kind of analysis because as architects of the smart vote campaign announced at the very beginning, they were trying to select to the smart vote list much more visible, much more experienced and experienced candidates. To make a long story short, those candidates which had either in advance good chances to be elected or re-elected. So this is why this kind of analysis, this method of analysis, will not help us to answer the initial question whether the smart vote campaign was successful or not. But by analyzing the personnel who took part in St. Petersburg local elections in 2019, I have found very interesting phenomenon. I have found that a lot of candidates, so just a little bit more words about the St. Petersburg local elections. In those elections, about 3,840 non-United Russia candidates took part. But among them, I have discovered 289 candidates which took part simultaneously in different elections. For instance, in this particular intercity territory and in that particular intercity territory, simultaneously at the same time, the same persons, exactly. And among them, I have found 78 candidates which took part simultaneously in different local elections, but at the same time keeping the same party affiliation. So once again, I have found 79 candidates, absolutely the same persons who took part in different elections, but with the same party affiliation. So I would like to look how differ their electoral results in those electoral districts where they were supported by the smart vote campaign, and in those electoral districts where they were not supported by the smart vote campaign. So as you may see, here you may see via plots kind of graphics which shows the distribution of particular numbers. In this case, shares of the voters received by those candidates. So as you may see, in those electoral districts where candidates were supported by the smart vote campaign, this via plot, they got approximately 19% in average, 19% of popular support. But in those electoral districts where candidates were not supported by the smart vote campaign, they got about 11% of popular support. At the same time, it's important to mention that most of those candidates, the vast majority of those candidates, were newcomers. They did not have any experience in this particular electoral district or in this particular electoral districts. They were newcomers, most of them. Well, even looking at this picture, we may see that the smart vote campaign made a difference, at least in the course of St. Petersburg local elections. But I made another analysis, I made a regression analysis. I included those candidates into my sample. I controlled some district and candidate level controls. By conducting this regression analysis, I have measured the average impact of the smart vote campaign across the St. Petersburg local elections in 2019. This impact was about 7.5%, which is quite visible, I have to say. Well, based on this analysis, I have discovered that smart vote campaign made a difference, at least in St. Petersburg, and this numerical impact was 7.5%. But to be honest, this assessment is probably the bottom line one, because in the course of St. Petersburg local elections, we witnessed a lot of electoral irregularities, voter intimidation, electoral fraud, and the like. So probably the overall impact of smart vote campaign in the course of St. Petersburg local elections in 2019 probably even higher. Well, one can contradict to me and say that St. Petersburg is probably a unique case. It's huge city with huge population of open-minded citizens. It's city with a long history of liberal opposition inside it and the like. And but it would be completely sound contradiction. This is why I decided to measure the smart vote impact across the whole elections where this campaign was in use. So the smart vote campaign was in use across a range of elections. For instance, in this table, you may see the number of elections which were imposed to the Smart Vote campaign. There were 11 elections in Russian regional legislative elections, and 20 elections in Russian regional capitals. You may see that some places are highlighted by red. This is because in those elections, only proportional representation electoral system was in use, and the Smart Vote campaign is not operating in a proportional representation electoral system, because in proportional representation, you have to vote for particular parties, and it's pretty clear for whom you have to vote in the party list for any party except just United Russia. But those parties has to be able to overcome the electoral threshold. So here you may see the number of elections to be chosen for the Smart Vote campaign in 2020. Again, we may see some elections, some regional legislative elections. We may see some elections were held in the regional capitals, but at the same time, we may see some elections, some places. Those places are big cities. Those cities are not regional capitals, just big cities with the number of inhabitants more than 2,100 people. So again, Smart Vote campaign was not in use in Sterlitamak. I have no idea why, because Sterlitamak used a mixed electoral system with quite a solid share of majoritarian component. So my best guess is that Sterlitamak, being located in Bashkortostan, the city without any electoral contestation. I have analyzed the electoral returns from Sterlitamak. They are completely, artificial. So there is no election in Sterlitamak. Probably this is why this place was not included into the Smart Vote list. And finally, on this table, you may see the number of elections which were imposed to the Smart Vote campaign in 2021. A lot of regional elections, some elections in regional capitals, but most importantly, State Duma elections across 225 single-member elections. State Duma is the lower chamber of the Russian parliament. And besides, Smart Vote campaign was also in use in the small city in Novosibirsk Oblast, Bersk, across 27 single-member districts, but I decided to remove Bersk from my sample because of very unique constellation of political factors, political actors, and because of very smallness of the city. Well, in sum, I have in my sample 58 regional elections, 59 elections in regional capitals, and 11 elections in cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants. So on this slide, you may see the distribution of the Smart Vote recommendation across the political parties and independents in different years, in 2019, 2020, and 2021. As you may see, the Smart Vote architectures decided to choose for this campaign mostly candidates from the Communistic Party of the Russian Federation, KPRF. The second place goes to the Liberal Party of the Russian Federation, and the third place is Just Russia. It's quite irrational because those candidates which were nominated by those political entities are probably those candidates with much higher chances to be elected in given electoral districts. So in sum, across those 3 years, there were 13,008 non-United Russia candidates, and among them, 3,105 candidates were supported by the Smart Vote campaign. On this slide, you may see also distribution of Smart Vote recommendation both across political parties and across the levels of elections. As you may see in 2019, in the Smart Vote list were only capital elections and regional elections. In 2020, there were capital elections, regional elections, and elections in big cities. And in 2021, we see that Smart Vote campaign supported candidates from regional capitals, State Duma elections, and Russian regions. Well, again, in order to assess the impact of the Smart Vote campaign, we may first look at the mean vote share received candidates both supported by Smart Vote campaign and those which were not supported by the smart vote campaign. But again, this analysis will not tell us much more about the effectiveness of the smart vote campaign, because as recently as in the St. Petersburg local elections, smart vote supported mostly those candidates which had pretty good chances of being elected in a given majoritarian electoral districts. Here you may see the descriptive statistics on the 2019 election. Here, descriptive statistics for the 2020 election, the same picture. As you may see, smart vote those candidates which were backed by the smart vote campaign are much more successful than those which were not supported by the smart vote campaign. And the same story is applied to the 2029 election. The same story. Unfortunately, by analyzing the smart vote campaign across Russian regions and big cities, I will not be able to apply the same logic which I applied by analyzing the candidates in the St. Petersburg. Because in St. Petersburg, I witnessed a lot of electoral campaigns which were held simultaneously at the same time in, very, in the same place. In regional and local elections, there were no such kind of campaign. So I had to find another way in order to measure the smart vote impact somehow. I have found this measure. So by analyzing the candidates' biographies, I have found that some of them were repeat runners. Repeat runner is a candidate which took part in these particular elections by having an experience of taking part in these particular elections in the past. For instance, if you look at State Duma elections in 2021, those candidates will be named as repeat runner who took part also in State Duma elections which held 5 years ago in 2016. So if you took part in both electoral campaigns, 2016 and 2021, you're a repeat runner. But I looked not only at all repeat runners, I looked only at those repeat runners who kept their political party affiliation. So, for instance, if you took part in 2016 elections being a candidate from LDPR, and now you are taking part in 2021 elections being nominated by Communist Party of the Russian Federation, I deleted those candidates from my sample because their switch from one party to another party would significantly influence on my result, for instance. So this is why I kept only those who did not change their party affiliation across the time. So in order to assess the smart vote impact in these circumstances, I relied on a kind of interesting statistical technique, which is called different and different estimation. It's a quasi-experimental statistical technique. The main idea behind this technique is the following. Look at this example, look at the screen. On the screen, you may see a hypothetical example. In this example, you may see the pre-treatment period and post-treatment period. And line between this graph shows the treatment. If we will return to my research, if we will return to the research on the smart vote campaign, we may see the group of repeat runners which were supported by the smart vote campaign in, for instance, 2021. This group could be labeled as experimental group, but the group of repeat runners which were not supported by the smart vote campaign in 2021 is a control group. So the same people, the same party affiliation, but treatment in one group and lack of treatment in another group. The experimental group was treated and the control group wasn't treated. So if we suppose that smart vote campaign make a difference, we should observe the significant change in result in a treated group. But if we will suppose that the smart vote doesn't have any impact on the electoral returns, we will have to see a lack of any difference in electoral returns across both groups. So if we will observe significant change in our treatment group after the treatment was imposed, we may attribute this difference to this treatment. So this is how the difference estimation works, in a couple of words. So usually difference in difference estimation could be shown in form of graph. So in this graph, you may see 4 box plots. Those box plots shows the mean electoral results of repeat runners based on the fact whether the repeat runners were supported by the smart vote campaign or not. So on the left side, you may see 2 box plots, tranquilize and current red, which approximately the same. Those box plots represent those repeat runners which were not supported by the smart vote campaign in 2021. As you may see, it's easily to see that their electoral results did not change across electoral campaigns. In previous elections, their results were 12.2%, and in 2020, for instance, 2021 elections, their results were absolutely the same, 12.2%. Yeah, but if we look at those candidates which were my experimental group, if you look at those candidates which were supported by the smart vote campaign, we may see significant change in electoral results. In past elections, the mean electoral result of those candidates were 19.8%, but in those elections where the smart vote campaign was in use, their mean electoral result is 24.5%. So we see here the significant change in their electoral results. But it's very naive way of estimation. If you using the smart difference in different design, you have to use much more sophisticated way to estimate the average treatment effect. In order to do that, I relied on regression analysis. So in this table, please look only at the last line over here. This last line shows the mean effect of the smart vote campaign. So we may see, based on the full sample of all candidates, that the average effect of the smart vote campaign across all elections held in 2019-2021 was about 4.5. It's quite a solid number. But at the same time, we can imagine that the smart vote campaign impact can differ in different places. For instance, we can imagine that in big cities where there is a big share of educated young population, the impact of smart vote campaign can be higher because this population has an access to the internet, independent sources of media, and the like. In opposite, in very small cities, in small settlements, in rural areas where the most elder population is concentrated, where there is very slow penetration of internet, we may see the much less impact of the smart vote campaign. This is why I divided my sample into 2 subsamples. So in first sample, I included only those electoral districts which were located in regional capitals. So in the third column, I included only those electoral districts which were located only in electoral districts elsewhere, small settlements, rural areas, and the like. So as you may see, as I hypothesized, the average impact of the smart vote campaign was much higher in regional capitals than in non-regional, than in electoral districts located elsewhere. But at the same time, we may see that even in those districts which were located in very small settlements, in rural areas, smart vote campaign also was quite a solid 3.2%. It's also a kind of significant result. So, as I have already said to you, by conducting this result, I relied on those candidates, repeat runners, who did not change their party affiliation across different elections. But at the same time, one can contradict to me that those repeat runners can switch their electoral districts within this particular electoral campaign. So this is why I decided to look only at those candidates which kept not only their party affiliation, but also the same district. This approach significantly reduced my sample because electoral engineering is much more popular across Russian regions and across Russian cities. And in case if a given city or a given region change its electoral system, it probably will lead to the completely different structure of electoral districts. But at the same time, I conducted this analysis, and I have found that the smart vote campaign, the effect of smart vote campaign was visible only on this quite reduced sample. Again, the overall impact of the smart vote campaign, as I have found, was 3.2% and 5.2% in big cities and 2.2% in small settlements, rural areas, and the like. So, this analysis, which I conducted, I mean, different approach, should be valid only in case if some very important assumptions are held. One of these assumptions is so-called parallel trends assumption. What's the essence of this assumption? If we suppose that there is a difference between treatment and control group after the treatment, we have to be sure that there were no differences between those two groups in the past periods. So this is why I decided to check my analysis on parallel treatment assumption. Here you may see three pictures which illustrates the electoral paths of those repeat runners who took part in more than 2 elections across the time. So as you may see, in period three shows us the period when the smart vote campaign was in use. You may see that past electoral results started to significantly change. But in order to check this parallel trends assumption in much more precise way, I decided to use again statistical analysis. Again, look please only on the last line. Here you may see that indeed smart vote campaign was effective in the period 3 when it was actually in use, then in period 2 when it could be in use but it wasn't. And again, the last important assumption is so-called, this assumption tells us that the distribution of treatment should not be correlated with the outcome in question. Or to put it simply, we have to expect that the smart vote treatment should be distributed across all candidates randomly. But unfortunately, in my analysis, this assumption is violated because smart vote team chose only those candidates which were much more popular and much more powerful in given electoral districts. In order to somehow to answer this assumption, I would like to conduct so-called placebo test. In order to conduct it, I looked at those regional elections and those city council elections which were held in parallel with those elections where the smart vote campaign was in use, but those elections were not being posed to the smart vote campaign. For instance, these elections are by-elections in regional legislative bodies and city council legislative bodies. So, as you may see, left picture shows us the picture which I have already showed to you. It's a real distribution of electoral results. And right-hand picture shows us the distribution of electoral results in our quasi-smart vote group and quasi-non-smart vote group. As you may see in this example, smart vote, or to be honest, this quasi-smart vote group will not somehow to influence on the candidates' electoral results. A couple of words is needed in order to explain how I selected candidates into the quasi-smart vote group and quasi-non-smart vote group. I decided to, based on real smart vote recommendations, I decided to look which candidates were selected for the smart vote list, whether those candidates were indeed the most popular or they were not. So in order to do that, I conducted regression analysis, and I have found that architectures of this campaign, of the smart vote campaign, indeed choose the most popular candidates into the smart vote list. Those candidates were those who took part in previous elections, who had some electoral experience, and not only held just an electoral experience, they included into the smart vote list those candidates which were successful, that is, hold first, second, and third places in the previous elections, And also in smart vote group, much more higher were selected those candidates from so-called parliamentary opposition parties, LDPR, Communist parties of the Russian Federation, and Just Russia. And based on those criteria, I created my quasi-small group, quasi-non-small group, and I will see that there is no, any impact of the quasi-smart vote group. Well, here's a table which shows additional evidence toward my conclusion. So to make a long story short, the main summary of my result: the smart vote strategy indeed posted candidates' electoral results countrywide, not only in St. Petersburg, very unique election, but also in big cities and even in small settlements. The second result is the smart vote estimate, which I got 4.5 or 3.2, depends on the technique in use, is probably the bottom line one because of the lot of electoral fraud in Russia. And finally, which stems from my second conclusion, the smart vote effect is mediated by electoral fraud, voter intimidation, and online censorship, because all those malpractice significantly reduce the overall impact of the smart vote campaign. Because it's kind of evident. So thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to speak to you.